yeah, the green issue is messy, but the incentives are all wrong, and the unintended consequences could be vast.
As the world goes green, are we considering the second-order effects and unintended consequences of our interventions? This is a question that I posed to Bronwyn Williams in a recent episode of my podcast, Solutions with David Ansara. What follows is a short extract from our longer conversation. If you would like to watch the full discussion with Bronwyn Williams, you can do so by clicking on the link in the description below. Enjoy.
That topic, I think, is quite an interesting one because there's many questions there and they tend to get conflated. There's the conflation about what is and what ought to happen now. Like we're dealing with a messy plate at the moment. You're in the middle of a particular situation that's whether you are personally responsible for causing that situation or not is it's entirely irrelevant. The point is you are here right now. The weather and the climate are doing X, Y, Z, and that's the situation we have right now. Unfortunately, a lot of the conversation around trying to deal with where we are right now in terms of climate and pollution and all the rest of it are talking about what we ought to do, but quite often those conversations about what we ought to do are not necessarily fully realistic about where we are right now. Now, you can't actually make good instrumental choices, and a good instrumental choice is a choice that you make that gets you to where you want to be. That's when you have achieved at being instrumentally correct. But it's very hard to do that unless you are empirically correct about the problem that you are actually facing. Not the problem you want to have, not the world you would like to be living in, but the actual reality about where you are right now and what your choice constraints really are. And unfortunately, a lot of the conversations about what to do with climate crisis and all the rest of it seem to be a little bit misled about the actual reality about the constraint, the choice constraint that we're actually facing now. A lot of the conversations seem to gloss over a lot of the costs of the preferred solutions, and a lot of the preferred solutions on the table have a lot of unseen effects that could actually end up undoing a lot of the things that we want to do. The point is when it comes to climate, much like with economy, and more so with climate, because we understand less about it because climate was here first, quite frankly, and whereas the economy is something we both made and broken all by ourselves, right? We made that up as we kind of went along. But climate, a lot of those systems, we don't even fully understand yet. And if we have broken those systems, if we have manipulated them, there is absolutely no way that we fully understand how we've manipulated them. And worse than that, we're not quite sure if our so-called fixes are going to make things worse. I think my favorite example there are the increasing calls by very rich and very powerful people for us to actually get involved with putting certain gases into our atmosphere to deflect sunlight. In other words, to reduce the amounts of sunlight that comes onto our planet so we can actually start to cool the planet.
What could go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong with actual climate engineering, right? So it's been done by people with good intentions saying, okay, we've made the planet too hot. Now we need to turn the knob down, but it doesn't work that way. The planet isn't like a heater that you can switch on and switch off. And now we turned it up too high so we can just turn it a few degrees down. We don't understand the way climate systems work. We can't even predict the weather. I mean, just open the weather app on your phone that told me it was going to be raining right now and the sun is shining right there outside. Chaos theory tells us that a very small measurement error can have vast complications going forward. And radical ideas like putting up sun shields or spraying extra sort of gases into the sky in order to deflect the climate and to engineer weather here or rain there or drought here, whatever the case is, are hugely dangerous because we have such hubris to think that we can mess around in a system that we already messed up and that our new messing up is not going to have unintended consequences. And already we don't even fully understand, the climate conversation was all about global warming until quite recently, and now it's more about climate change. We understand that it's not purely a one direction. We don't even understand what the changes we have made are actually going to do in the long run. And we're getting better at identifying these things, but we certainly don't know everything yet. And it's quite difficult when you start messing around with complicated systems, changing knobs that you don't fully understand what their long run impacts are going to be, and not understanding that we've already twiddled with other knobs over here and that a lot of those causes and effects are still going to roll out. So a lot of our sort of responses tend to be too grand, although we are facing grand challenges and no denying that at all. We have to think very carefully about the interventions we're going to make now. They're not going to have unintended consequences and make things worse. And this is something we've done many times, over and over and over again, in terms of human history, from putting the rabbits into Australia and then bringing into the other animals to eat the rabbits, to bringing, and on like the lady who swallowed the fly and ended up dying after eating a horse. The whole story, it does seem to remind me of that. That's the one challenge with the sort of the climate conversation at the moment. And the other one is the huge unfairness of the solutions being proposed. And it's a particularly unfair crisis, much like COVID was a very unfair crisis, in that the continent that's going to be most affected by climate change is going to be Africa. And the continent that can least afford the climate solution package that is being sort of proposed in terms of degrowth, in terms of reducing production, in terms of reducing industrialization, in terms of all those reductions, is Africa too. So it's a very unfair crisis. And that's a much more sort of practical conversation, much more sort of theoretical one about like, are we actually making the right choices? Yeah, are we just making other problems? And both those conversations have to be had, and none of them have easy answers. The unintended consequences conversations go on in many directions, even down to sort of like, how are we going to pay for the bits that go into our renewable fuel cells, for example? And there's so many unknowns. It's a very chaotic problem that we have created. And I think that my general advice would be that we shouldn't be too seduced by simple sounding solutions for such messy problems. And we also have to be kind about the people who are going to be carrying the cost of whatever solutions are chosen, because there will be people that are going to be left materially worse off, and there are people that are going to be made materially better off from applying whatever the chosen solutions are going forward. And I would always encourage people to interrogate perhaps the financial incentives involved with the decision makers who are choosing which solutions to adopt and which ones perhaps to overlook. And of course, the classic conversation there would be the conversations around nuclear, which has become like a particularly like a moral issue among many people that seems to be negating a lot of the science. But if you follow the money, you can usually unravel a lot of these stories, just understand why certain groups of people have preference for certain solutions. And quite often that preference is financially driven rather than actually solution driven. So that's a lot of words to say that, yeah, the green issue is messy, but the incentives are all wrong and the unintended consequences could be vast.
Yeah, I think that term hubris that you use is a very good one. I think the conceit of human action, that we can perfectly design the world to our intended end, I think is responsible for many of the biggest mistakes in history.
Like conversations around a lot of government policy too, right? So, government policy messed up, so let's give government more power so they can fix up the mess that they made by us deferring our agency and our choice to them. It's these things are very fractal, like I keep on saying. Like it's like the mistakes we make on the micro level are the same mistakes we make on a macro level. This constant sort of inability for us to learn from history that doing more of the same thing won't get us better results.
I like the quote from Hayek, who said that the curious task of economics is to demonstrate to man how little he knows about what he thinks he can design.
Absolutely. But I think on the climate side, the stakes are just so much higher. The stakes of messing it up. Like the economy is important and it has real impacts on real people's lives. But still, it's just money at the end of the day. Like if we look at it from a very sort of high level perspective, whereas the stakes involved in messing up our response to the climate crisis are existential, quite frankly. I mean, if we put too much of a particular sun-blocking gas into the sky and we cause an inadvertent, basically nuclear winter in our attempts to fix the mistakes we made 100 years ago, that's a much bigger problem. And nothing sort of focuses the mind like our mortality. But let us not use fear to sort of drive us into making short-term choices that could have very bad real effects, even with very well-intended policy. And we know these conversations from the world of economics and politics. We know that a lot of the worst evil done at a policy level or at a central planning level has been done by people who believed that they had good intentions. Not all of them. There are bad people as well as stupid people in power. But a lot of choices have been made by people who thought they were doing the right thing, but just didn't simply understand the incentives that they were creating and didn't understand the impacts and the long run effects and the basic laws of nature, the basic laws of supply and demand and up and down and force that begets a force in the opposite direction.
Thanks for watching. If you would like to watch the full conversation with Bronwyn Williams, You can do so by clicking here. And please also remember to subscribe to my other channel that's linked over here. My name is David Ansara. Until next time, take care.